A life worth living, one with purpose and meaning, has a consequence, a byproduct, the emotional state we call happiness. Kia ora and welcome to the Happiness Spectrum. I'm Pat and this is an introduction to personal management, a series of talks on how we think, plan and act to manage our life and with it, our happiness. If we have a right to happiness, then we also have responsibilities. Responsibilities that take account of the consequences of our actions. Happiness is more than just pleasure, it is that emotional state where we have purpose, take action, and meet our own expectations. These expectations, I suggest, need to be value-based, strength-based in fact, and take account of the consequences of our actions on other people and the environment that supports life. To do otherwise becomes meaningless, a me culture that does not appreciate that me, the individual, only has meaning in the context of us, our family, friends, community, and the place where we live. For many, this may entail a revaluation of one's values. I found that you can be happy and unhappy at the same time, and managing this dialectic is a key skill in helping lead a life worth living. These talks suggest ways to help manage this and can also be read through the website happinessspectrum.jimdofree.com. And if you go to that website, you can see a picture of a postcard that I picked up in Zimbabwe, and it says, "Don't agonize, organize." It's a reminder to me to stop procrastinating. These talks are an introduction to personal management. They're an aid to taking responsibility for your life and, as a consequence, your happiness. The first talks provide an oversight of happiness, of strength-based philosophy, and of basic human rights stroke needs. The rest cover a particular aspect of personal management. They're a mixture of ideas, management techniques, practical advice, and personal stories. They're based on many years working with people in community organisations, and I hope they are useful. So first off, let's have an introduction to the concept of happiness. Happiness in the 21st century, for many, is a personal quest. What do you want from life? A simple answer is, I want to be happy. But I think this is the wrong way of looking at happiness. So much of the wellness or happiness industry is just about consumerism. It may give you some pleasure, but ultimately it would not make you happy. Happiness is an understandable universal human desire, but how well do we appreciate the dialectical nature of the emotional state we call happiness? So much of the human condition, including our emotions, can be understood as a duality. The poles of love and hate, for example, do not exist in isolation. They are part of a whole, a oneness, a spectrum or continuum of emotions. It is the space between these poles that define and give meaning. This is the same for happiness. To help understand this, I use an overarching concept called the happiness spectrum. It is loosely based upon the concept of the mental health continuum. At any one time, we are all somewhere on this spectrum. It's even possible to be both happy and unhappy at the same time. Happiness, of course, is not constant. It's dynamic and is always changing. The actions we take have consequences that influence where we are on this spectrum. We can plan, act, reflect, and modify our actions to bring about positive personal change. This is a dialectical process that helps us manage our life and therefore our happiness. And if you want to see a little graphic of the happiness spectrum, again, go to the website happinessspectrum.jimdofree.com. Here's a quote from the Dalai Lama in The Art of Living. The basic fact is that all sentient beings, particularly human beings, want happiness and do not want pain and suffering. On those grounds, we have every right to be happy and to use different methods or means to overcome suffering and to achieve happier lives. There are always going to be times when we are unhappy because of health, grief, or other life events that we react to and affect us. These are internal and external factors that impact upon our life, and they include our basic human rights and needs. For example, is it possible to be happy if you live in poverty without enough food? Are there certain biological, cultural, social, or structural conditions necessary before we can be happy? Can you be consciously happy if you have a severe health condition or are born into a society that has a caste system? Is happiness the same as pleasure? It's important to recognize that there are external constraints to overcome before you can be happy. We can consciously manage a life worth living through concepts, knowledge, values, skills, processes and action that move us along the happiness spectrum. In my experience, this only works when it is done in a way that values other people, other life, and their place in the world. It is strength-based, and these talks illustrate this. Expectations. A life worth living, one with purpose, is dynamic and ever-changing. Within this, what makes us happy today may not make us happy tomorrow. Our expectations are constantly changing. And there's a relationship between aspirations, expectations, achievement, and happiness. Much happiness comes when we achieve our expectations or meet our aspirations. That is to say, when we lead a life worth living. Happiness is a universal desire, but not a universal condition. It is unique to an individual in time and place. My expectations as a 20-year-old student were different from now, having worked for 30 plus years with people in community organisations. If we want to be happy, then we have to manage changes in our circumstances and our expectations. That is to say, in our purpose. It's oft quoted, but change is the only constant. Each of us has individual expectations at any given time in our life. I have simplified individual expectations to mean purpose with passion. If we have purpose and we have a passion for that purpose, then we lead a life worth living and can be consciously happy. Passion can be defined as a desire to do something one likes or thinks is important. Sometimes addressing a lack of a basic right gives purpose, and this process in itself can be a happy one, intuitively contradictory as this may seem. Don't agonize. There are structural, cultural or personal constraints that impede our taking action, but I advocate a can-do approach to bring about personal change. I use the mnemonic PALM: plan, act, reflect and modify. Hence, don't agonize, organize. Because if you do nothing, it's likely nothing will change. Don't procrastinate, don't agonize, have confidence, plan, act, reflect and modify, and of course, learn along the way. Act. People are doers, and when we do something that has purpose and passion, when we meet our expectations, we're happy. I found this especially so when we are compassionate. I found this especially so when we collaborate with others. We've evolved, after all, as social beings. And interestingly, there's a relationship between purpose and life expectancy. If you have purpose, you tend to live longer. Also, interestingly, when you do something or move about, you stay healthier. I think it's also important to respect other life and our interdependence with it. Homo sapiens evolved about 250,000 years ago. But it's only in the last few hundred years that we have lost our intimacy with other life and developed a somewhat malignant disregard for our planet that is our home. The implication of this is that your purpose has to include a passion for the environment that we all live in. Reflect. Sometime forgotten is the need to reflect, to take stock, or to simply sit quietly. Reflection can be a formal process, a measurement against specific expectations or objectives. At other times it can be meditative, using, for example, a mindfulness exercise. A friend once said to me that every day she takes a 20-minute holiday doing nothing. I like her advice. So only you know or can find your purpose. Only you know what you're passionate about. And these talks suggest ways of finding purpose and passion and then turning them into practical, manageable actions that enable your expectations to be met, to help you lead a life worth living, and through this be happy. Some of the time, of course. It's not possible to be happy all the time. Some definitions now. There are many, many definitions of happiness, and here are two that I like. Happiness is a state of well-being that encompasses living a good life, one with a sense of meaning and deep contentment. That's from Psychology Today. Another is overall appreciation of one's life as a whole, and that's by Ruth Veenhoven. If you'd like to further research happiness, maybe start with the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who saw the desire for happiness as the sole purpose of life, an end in itself, and that all other things are desires as a means of producing this. There are no gods and no life after death. We should look to empirical evidence and logic. Epicurus is a good starting point. If you're interested in happiness as a duality, happiness being meaningless without its opposite, unhappiness or suffering, they are two aspects of the same thing. For Buddhists, humans have a right to be happy, but only in the context of not creating suffering for others. So check out Buddhism. And there's also an interesting section on happiness in Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow by Yuval Noah Harari. It's a great book. I mentioned Ruth Veenhoven. He's a Dutch sociologist and a pioneer and world authority on the scientific study of happiness. His work on the social conditions for human happiness in the Netherlands has contributed to a renewed interest in happiness as an aim for public policy, and it's an inspiration for the United Nations adopting happiness measures as an holistic approach to development. And to conclude all of this, mystical insight and scientific empiricism are both part of this holistic approach to happiness and managing a life worth living. The next talk will be on basic rights and strength-based philosophy.